Hey fellow weirdos, thanks for joining us today. I'm finally off of voice restriction, so I thought we'd do a video. I've got my cup of tea here. I'm gonna try not to cough at you through this. But I've been seeing a lot of stuff on the comment threads in the pagan groups about gatekeeping, and a lot of angry people online accusing each other of this. So I thought it was a good topic for us to kind of discuss together right now and the history of it, because I'm not seeing a lot of information behind where these practices started or why they've been put into place, and I think that's causing a lot of the tension. As you know, I'm here to give you history lessons, so that's what we're going to do today. A quick Google search shows that there is really no real talk about why gatekeeping started or how these practices began or why they're in place. I found no serious threads, I found no serious conversations, no pages. Even Reddit was pretty devoid of information about where gatekeeping stems from, except to say that it's to keep the rich from getting richer and to protect teenage girls. Even one of my admins who is in charge of text did a lengthier search of the internet for several hours, and I think she came up with a total of 4 articles, only one of which actually gave information as to why they thought gatekeeping was or was not important and they were pro it. If you want a link to that article, let me know. I can post it later, but I try not to give out opinions unless you guys ask for them. But that's something I can definitely share with you all once I post this video at the end. We even went to such a length as to go into one of the pagan groups that are here on Facebook and start a thread asking people what they thought about gatekeeping, what gatekeeping practices were, and whether they thought they were beneficial or not beneficial. And ye gods, that turned into a debacle. I think it stayed up for less than 24 hours. People were citing TikTok and angrily yelling at each other. It didn't really come out with anything of any substance, and I think that's a really important reason why we need to discuss it here today. So I guess let's get into it. What is gatekeeping, and why do people gatekeep? Gatekeeping is any practice meant to keep people out. Gatekeepers are people who control access to something. We're going to discuss today how this applies to religion, how this applies to the craft and the occult, and especially magical practices. That's kind of how we refer everything here, whether it's science or what have you. I get this. Like, I totally get that gatekeeping is a buzzword right now, and having rules when you come into this community can be incredibly frustrating. It can feel a lot like discrimination, and I totally understand that, especially when it comes to race and gender and things like that. It can really feel like you're being kept out for something that's outside of your control. But I think there's a really fine line here, which we're going to get to discuss a little bit more in depth as we go along. Because there is a really, really long history of this taking place, especially inside of religious practices. Probably the farthest back that we'll see this kind of thing going on where we're keeping people out or where we're testing them before we let them into a religious practice is certain sects of Buddhist monks, which required people who were trying to join the monastery to wait outside the gates without food, water, or encouragement for 3 days before they were let in, as a sign of commitment before they were allowed to be a part of the monastery. We see this today even in more modern religions like Judaism. If you want people of the Judaic faith, they're not recruiting. If you want to become a part of the Judaic faith, you have to knock 3 times, which literally means that you have to seek out and find the rabbi of a particular temple 3 times. Usually that's done by going to his house. He is not going to make this easy for you. He is not going to answer the door just because you knock on it. In fact, he's going to purposefully make it hard for you. You have to actually interact with him 3 times before they will even bring you in. And once you are brought into the faith, then there is still some stuff that you have to go through. You still have to learn Torah. You still have to be bar mitzvah. You still have to take a bath if you're a lady. It's a process. We see this even in religions that came after Judaism, like Catholicism. That's another religion that does not believe in proselytization. They're not going out trying to recruit people into their faith. They're not standing on the street corners knocking on your door asking for people to come in. And if you decide to be, they're one of the more welcoming groups, but if you decide to become a Catholic, they're also going to put you through sort of rituals that can feel a lot like gatekeeping. They're going to make you take a class. You literally have to seek out a priest to find out how to take this class. You have to go through baptism. You have to find a mentor who will help you go through communion, who will help you choose a name for yourself, who will help you go through confirmation. It takes a while. There's a lot involved there. We see this in religions today that are a part of the occult, like Santeria. We see it among voodoo practitioners. They're not going to let anyone in, and they keep those religions very private and very sacred. I can tell you that there is one woman who's considered the foremost author on Santeria. She writes a book every now and then, and she, in fact, is Hispanic. And every book she writes, at the beginning of the book, she starts off by saying the last book was complete nonsense. That whatever they told her was not true, and she has found somebody else who will tell her the real deal, and that's because these religions are very much kept a secret. And even you'll find some orders that don't consider themselves religious, especially occult orders that are even more secret. We've maybe heard of groups like the Golden Dawn. There is nowhere online where you can just go and sign up to be a part of the Golden Dawn. You just can't. We know that this is an organization that has been around for hundreds of years. We know that it's esoteric. We know that it has to do with the occult. But you're not going to find a lot of information aside from historic speculation as to what's going on inside of these communities. You can't just go and join up. Even if you do get accepted to some sort of Golden Dawn group on Facebook or wherever, you're going to have to ask really specific questions to get any answers, and you are going to get very contradictory answers. And you are going to get a lot of people telling you how silly you sound. These things are kept secret for a reason. They are secret societies. And this is a long-standing tradition. I mean, we know the Elysian Mysteries wouldn't be mysteries if they had gone about and told everybody about them. And I understand how frustrating this can be, especially when it comes to things like race or these long initiation rituals like the Golden Dawn has, which are kind of just up to the speculation of a group of council members. And how some of these are derived from things like gender, but we also have to consider the history of these groups. A lot of these groups do not have decided that their practices are closed or their practices are secret because they have a long history of being discriminated against because of these practices. We have seen that throughout time. These practices were often used against them if they let them out. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we broach cultural appropriation, but we have to consider where these people are coming from on their end. We preach a lot on this page about acceptance of individuals and acceptance of differences and not being judgmental about how people practice their faith. I know you guys are from lots of different faiths. I'm seeing it in the comments here right now, people telling me that they're coming from lots of different faiths, and I've seen it in the comments on our posts. Y'all are welcome here on this page, but we have to accept that we all are different. We all come from different backgrounds, and everybody has a right to that different background of theirs. And when we're talking about organizations, sects, religion, especially, we have to think about how their practice operates. Sometimes the legality of what goes on inside of their practice is not exactly okay in a modern day world. I think that people of the Judaic faith have been very good about saying things about how their practices are okay and that we do this for a reason. Kosher slaughter of animals, that we're doing this in a way that doesn't hurt the animal, and we're doing it in a way that we think helps keep cleaner, and we're going to eat the animal afterwards. But the way animals are sacrificed in other religions might be harder to explain to authorities. It might be hard to explain, especially because they don't want to explain the reasons behind why they're doing it, or other people may not understand the reasons behind why they're doing it because they don't have a sacred text like the Torah to look after. There are a lot of ifs and ands here, and there are things that you're not going to know about until you're inside of that religion, that you're not going to know about until you're inside of that organization. And it's very easy to jump to a conclusion and say, I'm being gatekept, and not understand the history behind why they have these rules and why they're set up. Especially if we're not considering what that gender or race has been persecuted for in the past. Or what all of us who practice this path have been persecuted for. There is a really, really long history of people with indigenous practices being beaten, raped, murdered for what they believed. There is a long history of women being murdered for what they believe. I think a lot of Americans like to talk about I think it's 12 people from the Salem witch trials, 8 of which I think were women. But that is nothing compared to the hundreds of thousands of women and the hundreds of thousands of Huguenots who were fleeing or being killed for their belief systems. And we have to understand that, yes, we're in a more modern time, and yes, we're in a place where we're more culturally open, but that certain genders, certain cultures, certain races still hold these warnings very, very dear to them. Furthermore, I think even within esoteric practices and even within occult practices and things, we have to think about people's personal points of views on this sort of thing. There are serious consequences for dabbling, and I think anyone who has long-term practiced this can attest to it. There is a long history of madness after dabbling in this sort of thing. I know that I love to tell the women that are around me that one of the greatest thing about having a group of women around me is that they help keep me sane. And it's not that I think that I have any sort of mental issue, but, you know, it's kind of nice when I hear or see something that maybe not everyone hears or sees to have somebody who's standing next to me going, no, I saw that weird thing too. It was definitely weird. If you are all alone and experiencing that, it's very easy for you to say to yourself, I'm losing my mind. And I think that there can become a lot of deep-rooted anger at the person who or kind of led you into this, or at the people who are advocating this sort of occult practice, if you begin to do it without any sort of guidance and then end up experiencing something that makes you upset or makes you uncomfortable or makes you feel like you're losing your mind. I see you have to think about a lot of people hold that law of tenfold very dear to them. That's the idea that I think the Wiccans use it as the law of threefold, but the idea that whatever you do is going to come back on you. People take that very seriously. That may not be something that you take very seriously, but there's a long history of other groups taking that very seriously. And it's not necessarily that it's going to just come back on the person who's practicing the act. It may also come back on the person who taught the individual how to perform that act. And I think that that's not something that a risk that a lot of people aren't willing to take. And that's okay. If that's who they are. They're not ready to step that far. That's all right. And we need to respect that. There are other people out there. There are other sects out there. There are other covens out there. I think there's also, when it comes to mentors, the idea that you might let somebody into your world and they might see some heavy stuff and then deny that. And that can be very hurtful to the person who is trying to let you in on something that's very, very personal and very, very sacred to them. And a lot of this is like, basically, like, we hear about death a lot with the occult, and I'm going to try not to like roll my eyes when it comes to demons and things like that, because we all have our own personal belief systems, and I totally get that. But just safety measures. We do these videos every week in the middle of an apothecary. You have never once heard me recommend you use any of these herbs that are behind me and on either side of me. because there are a lot of safety measures, there are a lot of drug interactions, there are a lot of things to consider. As a matter of fact, I was teaching someone some botanical stuff just yesterday, and we had a lot of rules when we were doing it because we were dealing with hazardous material. Rules like you need to wear gloves, and you need to clean up, and you need to use special jars, and you need to use special equipment, and these can't be things that you use inside of your kitchen. You can't use your spaghetti colander to pour out hemlock. I'm sorry, you just can't. And I know to someone who can't afford that equipment, that can feel very much like discrimination. I know to someone who maybe doesn't have the control of their body to hold a funnel and a strainer and a jar all at the same time, that can feel very albiest. But I think that as people, as teachers, we need to recognize that we don't want our students to end up dead. We don't want our pets to end up dead. We're not going to handle hazardous material without the proper precautions. We're not going to hand you a chunk of you without handing you a respirator. That's not to say that you cannot have you in your house. It's just saying that we want you to be careful about how you use this because it is dangerous, it is poisonous. And that's, I think, mostly where this death thing comes in, is really as a safety measure. But there are other consequences of dabbling that we have to think about, like from a spiritual level, opening a door. When you become initiated into occult practices, you're opening a door within yourself. You're opening a door into a world that not everybody experiences. You may not be able to close that door. You may not be prepared for what comes through that door. And I think a lot of people, like we talk about, monks making you wait or rabbis making you wait. I think the same thing applies with the occult, that people want to make sure that you're all in before you open that door that you may not necessarily be able to close, because there may be consequences down the road. I think there's also, where we're talking about religious communities, there's also a very personal sense of offending the gods. People who are a part of religious occult organizations take their gods very, very seriously. They thank them for everything they do. They talk to them quite often. They have a very personal relationship with these gods. They don't want to offend them because they don't want that to reflect on their practice, and they also don't want that to reflect on the newcomer. I can't say whether or not this is a justifiable thing. This is not my opinion on the matter. I'm trying to let you know kind of where these practices are coming from and what the history of them is. But I think in most cases, most people are thinking kind of safety issues. You can't just hand somebody something powerful without a warning. I'm not going to give you hydrochloric acid without making sure that you're in a well-ventilated area. And that's basic alchemy. That's part of the occult. But we need to question as practitioners why we're doing these things. Why are we stopping people from doing things? And we need to question when we shouldn't. Just because a rule was passed down to us does not mean that it is necessarily still an applicable rule. Or just because you think it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that's an absolute. So before we lay down these rules for other people, we really, really need to consider not just where we're coming from, but where they're coming from. And that's a huge part of what we talk about on this page, right? I mean, that's respect of other people, that's respect of other cultures, that's respect of diversity. We need to think about where other people are coming from and how this is going to affect other people and how it's going to make them feel. We need to make sure that if we're laying down rules, that it's a necessary thing. And right from the beginning, we need to think about that. We need to think about what rules we're going to have for taking on students. If we're students, we need to think about who we want to take on as a mentor, what kind of paths we want to go down. And as a newcomer, we need to think about why we may be becoming gate-kept. I have a very, very good friend who is a good old Southern boy, who is very, very Christian, but he loves to say this great Southern euphemism. which is, if you meet an asshole in the morning, you might have met an asshole. But if you meet assholes all day, you might be the asshole. And I think that we need to think about that too if we're looking for a mentor. If one person says to you, hey, you're not allowed into my coven, that person might just be a jerk. They might have just silly reasons for that. But if you have gone to 12 different covens and all of them have turned you away, you may want to look within yourself and ask yourself why that's happening. So it comes from both ends of the spectrum that we need to think about where we're going and where we're coming from as students and as teachers, because I think all of us are both of these things. Hopefully we're both of these things. It's important, I think, to learn the history and the basics. There is a reason why we focus a lot on history on this page, and I think it's because we need to know where we're coming from so that we know where we're going. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do this video, because I think a lot of people feel gate-kept, but they don't know the history behind why these rules are in place. And if we're more aware of why these rules are in place, then we can make more informed decisions, basically. And that goes for anything you're doing in your life, realistically. Lots of newcomers dip because this is hard, because they're scared, because they become disinterested. And we don't want to put those people in peril. We want to make sure that we have handed them the initial skills that they need before we put them out into a world of something crazy. It is not okay to just jump into, how to make tinctures without first teaching somebody the importance of soap. It's really not. There's a reason why on our Etsy page we sell soap. It's important if you're going to deal with botanicals. It's important if you're going to deal with alchemy. And not everybody can afford to go out and buy salt scrubs and antibacterials and things that have carbon in them that will absorb those chemicals on your skin. But we can learn to make those things really cheaply, and if you don't have the laboratory or the ability to do it in your house, we're more than happy here at the Pagan Memebrarian. Harvey Sisters is more than happy to supply those things for you. But furthermore, I think as a teacher, we can't control what a student does with what we hand to them. Once they leave our care, we have no idea where they're going to go after that. We have no idea how they're going to use that. So it is really important to all of us that we give them the tools to be able to handle that later. And all of this means that we can let people in on so very, very many things right up front. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the thing that they want to learn right this second. And I think as people that are out of the broom closet, we hear that a lot. People come to us and they ask us for very specific things, and sometimes those things are a little bit dangerous, and we have to back up and say, well, we're going to learn these other things first, and we'll get to that, but that's going to take time. And as people who are trying to learn, hopefully we're always trying to learn, we have to practice patience while we're doing that. I know I start people off with simples and divination because those are the basis of all the greater tricks that I teach them later, and those things require commitment. They require mastery before we move on to greater things. It's important that we see that this is a scholarly endeavor. No matter how you look at it, you are looking to learn, and we all take 101 before we take 600, right? I'm going to teach you the basics of design before I hand you AutoCAD. It's only fair. Otherwise, AutoCAD is really going to frustrate you. And we don't want to scare people off either. Also, we have to think about how the origins of a lot of these practices are ethnically sacred. We have to tread very lightly around things like cultural appropriation. That's part of respecting diversity. That's part of respecting other people for having different sorts of things in their lives. For having different sorts of belief systems and practices, and we need to respect the secrecy of secret orders. It is we all have secrets. We all have things that we just don't want to share with other people, and that's all right. In fact, that's healthy. It is healthy to have boundaries. It is healthy to have things that you say, no, this is mine. This is not something I'm prepared to talk about. This is not something I want to share with the world. And that's okay as individuals. You don't have to share everything with everybody. And the same goes for orders in sex. They don't have, these secret orders are not obligated to let you in because you want to be let in. And I know that that could be frustrating. I know that that can be hard. But it's also something that we have to respect as far as their boundaries go. We also have to think, as people who are leaders of covens and groups and sects, why we are rejecting people. A lot of us use prognostication and sensing to determine who we're going to teach and who we're going to let in before we really get to know them. And this is as much a reflection on you as it is a reflection of the other person. And that's something that you need to dive deep inside of yourself, because this really is about both parties who are involved. I will say, conversely, on the other hand, if we want to free the weirdos, if we want to make the occult something that's okay, that we don't have to hide from, that we don't have to worry about being kicked out of our families because we are pagan or because we practice something a little bit more magical than their organized religion, we need to gatekeep less. We need to have less rules. We need to make this something that we're showing the outside public more. But that also means that we need to see more respect from the outside public. We need to see more respect from other people for that diversity. We need to remember to protect ourselves. I tell every student I start with the story of Jeanne d'Arc, and I remind myself of it regularly. I wear her medal around my neck and pictures of her all over my house. This is a very good cautionary tale of why people who are different, how people who are supernatural have been victimized. Jeanne d'Arc was a young 13-year-old girl who really wanted to fight for France, and while she was fighting for France, all was great and all was fine and dandy. She rode off into battle on her horse, and when it was all over, they asked her why she wanted to do this, and she said it was because she had received messages in visions. And they accused her of witchcraft for that and put her on trial to be burned at the stake. And when it turned out that she said those visions were religious in nature and they were from saints, they still burned her at the stake for wearing men's clothing. I will point out that men's clothing was the armor she wore into battle. So a lot of this means that we have to protect ourselves, but we also have to be conscious of other people. We can show what we do without necessarily showing how we do it. We need to respect our audience, but we also need to respect the magician's secrets. I'm going to try to get into, for you, I think I've given enough of a cautionary thing, and we'll open up the end for questions, but I'd like to go through some of the things I've seen online and that I have seen over the years as things that are being called out as gatekeeping. But before I do that, I think it's important to point out that many people do believe in doing things the old way. Bloodline witches have rules that are passed down generationally, and they keep them out of respect for those generations, for their ancestors, for their parents, for the people who taught them this. We hear these rules sometimes in public circles and they feel stupid. But realistically, traditions were meant to keep traditions within certain families. And some of those may not be feasible today. I totally get that. Not every family has kept up the practice, and not everybody who's interested in esoteria may be able or has the luxury of being born into a family that does have mentors readily available for them. Not all of us witches are bloodline witches. Bloodline witches practice differently than other sects. And we need to respect that. We need to respect each other's differences. That doesn't mean you can't try yourself and see where you get. There are other practices. There are other covens you can join. There are other people you can look to. All orders have magic. I say it on the page all the time. Whether you are Christian, whether you are Muslim, whether you are Mormon, whether you are an atheist and a big believer in science, whether you are a hedonist and have no gods at all, we all believe in some sort of magic. Whether that's what God did, or why bees can fly, or just the void in itself, there is some sort of magic to that. So there are a lot of options out there for you. But I have some examples here of some of the things that I have seen over the years that I think are really frustrating people, and I'd like to give the history behind why they're done, with the warning that I am not saying whether or not I advocate or do not advocate for these things, just this is where the history of that is coming from. The most common one I see all the time is about the tarot, which is your first tarot deck must be gifted to you. This was done historically by the Romani people, because they were a traveling group of people who relied a lot on divination and symbols to make their money, to support their clans. Saying that your first deck of tarot had to be gifted to you was a great way of ensuring that you had a teacher. And we have to remember that this is at a time when not every tarot deck came with a book explaining how to use it. It also made sure that charlatans weren't out there giving divination a bad name. It ensured that you asked for help. It ensured that other people weren't pretending to be a part of your clan and then giving your clan a bad name. The second one is one that we have addressed in other videos, and that's about runes. And this is probably the second most common one I see, and that's that runes must be handmade. This was done to keep people in touch with the sacredness of the Firthark alphabet. It required effort to make your own runes, and that was really important to the Norse people, because they believed that runes came after Odin hung from a tree for 9 days. Now, they're not saying you need to hang yourself from a tree for 9 days, but they are saying that these letters came directly from something that existed before their gods, that they came from something ephemeral, from deeper inside of or behind the world, and they wanted you to put forth an effort and meditate on it while you made it. I see one of the questions I've been seeing since we've been talking about scrying is that scrying stones are special. They must be passed down. And at the time that this became a rule, this was because scrying stones were special. You could not go to your local lapidary and just buy yourself a nice hunk of round onyx. Somebody had to go and dig up a special stone, and it was passed down through families and rubbed over and over and over again by decades, by ancestors for decades and decades going back. And it was believed that that stone then held the power of all of those ancestors who rubbed it. It ensured also that you weren't getting a fake rock. Even today, I know that that's a struggle for people. There are a lot of rock hounds out there that are super unscrupulous. I had someone today show me a piece of what was supposed to be topaz, which was really a very expensive hunk of glass. It happens. And this was one of those rules that ensured that that didn't happen inside of certain cultures. The next one I want to go over is your familiar must choose you, which is also something we've talked about on this page. This ensured a willing bond between both parties, not just a willing bond on your side, hey, I'm going to take this animal and it's going to be a part of me, but also that the animal wanted to be a part with you, so that you weren't mistreating the animal. The animal had the option to leave if it wanted to. And I think in more modern times, this was likely encouragement to bond with wild animals, because these were animals that were unlikely to stay at your house, but maybe animals that returned to you over and over again in your life. We all know that in the 1600s, having a pet was a good way to end up on the pyre. one thing that we mentioned at the beginning of this video is the idea that you have to knock 3 times. And this applies, like we said, to how you get a teacher. Perhaps this is the most frustrating of these kind of rules, because you've come all of this way. You've gone through all of these things, and you've decided to play by the rules. And then it is very hard to find somebody who wants to mentor you. But it does require commitment. It is literally a sacrifice. And the reason that we tell you that people are told to knock 3 times is because they want to see that you're willing to make a sacrifice from the beginning. Another thing you're going to hear from religious groups is you must have a God system. And this has become, some practices are religious. In fact, I would say the majority of them are. They may require you to have a certain set of gods. Some of them just want to ensure that thanks is given for what we receive. They think of it sort of how AA thinks of it, as you need a higher power, whoever that is. And that's really more to ensure humility as we're going through this. It's very easy when you receive a power you didn't know you had to become a little egotistical with that power. Having a God helps keep one humble. One that we've been discussing necromancy on the page a lot, and one that I think tends to upset people is that you must pay for anything you take from a graveyard. I did it. You feel stupid paying for dirt. I understand. But the bottom line here is it's not your dirt. This is meant to protect you from the angry dead. It's usually just a few pennies thrown on the ground. I'm actually not entirely sure why this is considered gatekeeping. I think of it more as an insurance policy against kind of stealing. I get that sometimes you may not be able to afford a few pennies. I also get why digging up graves is illegal. This one you're going to have to reconcile for yourself, but it was traditionally intended to keep the angry dead from coming after you. And I understand the frustration here, because theft in the occult is way, way, way more complicated than throwing a few pennies to buy some grave dirt. You're going to hear things like stolen flowers work best, or stolen cinnamon if you want to steal a heart. And it feels like it's okay to steal from the living, but it's not okay to steal from the dead. And let's be real here. If we're talking about stolen flowers and stolen cinnamon, we're talking about love spells. And love spells are essentially fucking with people's free will. If you're willing to fuck with people's free will, you're probably okay with a little bit of theft. You're probably okay with the consequences that may or may not come from that. But necromancy in itself is an ancient art which may invoke a spirit to leave the underworld. If you believe in that sort of thing, then you may also believe that the dead will have to pay the ferryman to get back into the underworld. If you don't want an angry spirit following you around, leaving a few coins is a good way to ensure that they can get back to the place that they came from. It's also a good way to make sure that they're not angry that you stole from them. And that's a question that you're going to have to ask with yourself. Do you want to be stuck with that angry spirit, or is it okay to pay for what you took and their way back to where they need to go? Necromancy in itself, although necromancy is traditionally defined as just communicating with the dead, Ouija boards are necromancy, seances are necromancy, but at its deeper parts, necromancy is not for the faint of heart. You're going to need to think this over. This involves some pretty shady stuff if you're getting deeper into it. Maybe saving up a little bit of money to get into it ensures that it sticks in your mind a while and you have thought through the consequences of what you're doing. This is probably also one of the oldest rules there is. There's a long history of Egyptian deficciones, which are kind of like cursed tablets. You paid the craftsmen and then you gave them to the dead for free. You buried them like grave goods, and they were generally made on metals, which at the time were very expensive. We've all heard of the curse of the mummy, you know, don't open up that tomb. 3 cents, throwing a few 3 cents into a grave is really the watered down version of this. One that I get questioned about all the time by people who are coming to me for this purpose is to never pray to a river god. And I know that all of you are thinking, like, what? I live in the desert. You want me to find a beach? Like, that's insane. But this came from the idea that rivers are fickle. They choose the easiest path. They're also easily angered. We've all heard the story of Achilles trying to fight the river and losing. Rivers will literally run through your fingers like water, and they change their course frequently. And that's kind of where that idea comes from. One I've heard a lot more often lately is you can only use a candle once and for one purpose. The idea behind this historically is that the candle, when you do candle magic, the candle that you're using becomes imbued itself with the magic of the rite. And using the candle again can muddy the waters for the next rite. So if you're using a candle for a love spell and then you decide to use that candle to affect somebody else, you have to consider how your second spell is going to affect the person that was involved in the love spell. New salt is one I hear all the time in the South. You can only use new salt. This is sort of new theology, and it's mostly Appalachian. And this is likely due to financial constraints, because new salt is generally the form of little salt packets, like ones that would be stolen from a restaurant. I've read about a dozen books on backwoods and granny magic here in Appalachia, and there really isn't a lot of other reason behind this besides financial constraint that I can dole out. You know, these are people who likely it was hard for them to get to a restaurant. They almost never left their mountain. These are people who did not have a lot of money. These are people who did not have a lot of other people around them who were maybe outside of their holler. So this in itself may have been a sacrifice, but I think it's mostly attributed to a financial origin that's just been kind of handed down over the years. The next one, which I think is the reason our thread on the last group got shut down, was you can't practice Santeria, tribal magic, have a spirit animal, etc. unless you are a part of that cultural group. I'm going to be real blatant here. I try not to give my opinion, but the opinion of I do feel very passionately about this. If you want to know my opinion on this, I would be happy to give it to you. I recommend that you do that via PM. Feel free to message me, because it will turn into an argument, not between you and I, but likely if it's done in public. But this really, really, really bridges on cultural appropriation. It's egocentric. These groups, these ethnic groups, feel that this is not respectful of diversity. This is not respectful of what their ethnic groups went through to maintain these principles. And that at its heart is colonization. So this can be a really, really touchy one, and this is going to be one of those ones that makes people very, very hot about depending on their backgrounds. One that we have been hearing more in pop culture over the last few decades is men can't be witches. However, this is probably one of the oldest ones. This goes back thousands and thousands of years to the Neolithic era, when we had more matrilineal societies and cultures. Matrilinealism is not matriarchy. It does not mean that women are the heads of society. It, however, means that societies are tracked through the maternal line. So just like people in the United States today often take their father's last name as their last name, that's patrilineal. In some of the first societies, people were tracked via their mother's heritage. And this makes sense because you may not always know who the father is, but you generally know who the mother is. But the reasoning behind this goes beyond that. Women were seen not just as the inventors of things like agriculture and writing and math and all of those great things that Enoch told us were sins, but they were also the ones responsible for giving birth. So when the very first people sat down and thought about, well, who created the universe, it was a very easy jump to say, well, it must have been a woman because women give birth to humans, so why wouldn't a woman give birth to the universe? And it makes sense, therefore, then to say that women are also the creators of magic and therefore the priestesses. And we see this reaffirmed again and again and again throughout history. This is reaffirmed biblically. We just mentioned Enoch. He outlines in the Bible, which is not in canon today because it was taken out, but was at one time before it was canon was specifically set down as it is what we see in the King James Version of today. He outlines the difference between witches, warlocks, magicians, and sorcerers. And realistically, the only thing that makes somebody a witch is that they're female. And we see it reaffirmed again in the 1600s. Persecution of the women during the witch trials in Europe and in the United States was primarily done to women, even though this likely evolved from Catholic and Protestant tensions in England. It was the women who really got the brunt of this because women were not allowed to travel alone. So Huguenots who traveled to countries that were accepting of other religions were most often men. Women were stuck where they were, either because they couldn't travel alone, because they had families, because they didn't have jobs of their own. And so they were the ones who ended up persecuted. They were the ones who ended up being called women. And we saw it reaffirmed again now with the women's movement. Women want a practice where they're not scrutinized by men, where they can dance around naked if they want to and they don't have to feel sexualized. And this goes hand in hand really with the bloodline witch theory. Once again, because we may not always know who the father is, but we always know who the mother is. I hear that a lot. You must be a bloodline witch. And come on, not all of us have that luxury. That doesn't mean that you're not still magical. You are magical. All of us are magical. We all are. We all are made of stardust. We all have a little something inside of us, and we're all capable of probably more practical magic than we think. But you'll hear a lot that, like tools, skill is inherited. And this was yet another assurance that you had a teacher that you were beholden to. If you believe in the bloodline witch theory, it meant that not only did you have a mentor who was always around you because it was your mother, or your grandmother, or your aunts, or whoever, or your sister, it ensured that you had a mentor who you felt that you owed some sort of debt to. The ancient Greeks held this belief even among the gods. We see Hecate as a lot of things, and we see Circe referred to as the first witch, and then later on down the line, we hear about Hecate being Circe's mother. That developed as it went on. We hear about Circe having siblings who were capable of things like poisons or others, necromancy. That this was a family trait. And we obviously just talked about it being a belief in the 1600s, even in our more modern era. This is persistent, and it likely stemmed from fear. Accusation of witchcraft kept women in check, let's face it. And now we're kind of seeing the reverse side of that coin, where women have more equality and men want to be let in on these practices that women have been doing for thousands of years, just like men were let in on them thousands of years ago. I find this especially interesting from a scientific standpoint because it is a very roundabout way of saying that gifts are part of a genetic anomaly related to the X chromosome, which is crazy interesting. I mean, does that make us cryptids? I don't know. But it is saying that the gift for this sort of thing has to do with brain chemistry and bodily makeup, which is different from person to person, even if we are essentially all made of the same stuff. And we know that some genetic mutations are disproportionately affecting different races and genders, just like the cones in your eyes are developed or along the X, or inherited, the way they develop is inherited along the X chromosome. Now, that is not to say that there are not colorblind women out there. That's not to say that there aren't tetrachromat men out there. That's not to say that there aren't Caucasians and Asians with sickle cell. But we do know that certain traits can be traced to the X chromosome, or culturally, as we've seen with certain diseases lately, may inherently affect people of different lineages differently. Those are just some of the ones I found. If you found others, we're going to have Q&A at the end of this, and you can feel free to ask me all about them. But I get it. With all these rules, it gets super confusing. It can feel like you're being deliberately left out, especially because some of these rules change. And it's important to remember, most of them were spawned out of necessity. Our practices change over the years as we learn and grow, and so do our rules. I learn new things daily, and then I teach them to the people who are learning from me. I mentioned earlier that I tend to start people with simples, and every time I teach someone candle making, I tell them the same story about when I learned candle making as a child. I once tried to make a 10-wick candle in a glass jar, and that thing exploded like a fucking grenade. Just fiery shards of glass everywhere, nearly murdering me and burning down the house. I mean, it was just really, really awful, and I still remember how angry my mother was to this day. I tell people this story, and I always ask them after I tell it to them, I tell them that I learned a really good lesson that day, and I ask them what they think that lesson was. And I usually get some sort of esoteric or mystical answer, and that's not the case. What I learned is 1 wick per glass jar. Be careful of how many oils you're putting in your candle. That is not to say that you can't use ceramic and put a couple of wicks in it, because it's less likely to have bubbles in it than glass is. There are workarounds to these sorts of things, but it's a practical lesson. I'm not saying don't put 10 wicks in a glass jar because I don't want you to have a glass 10-wick candle. I'm saying it as a matter of personal safety, because I've had fiery shards of glass thrown at me. And that's literally how these rules are made. And it's also how they're misconstrued. It's important to remember that magic is inherent in every belief system and culture, and everyone has the right to their own practice, and everyone has the right to their own rules regarding that practice. We need to tread lightly on cultural appropriation, and we need to remember that at its heart, occultism in general is an ancient practice. But we also need to remember that what we're doing now is also a new one. Wicca is the world's most modern religion. This is perhaps a living practice as it evolves over time. We need to find out what's right and what's appropriate for each group and for what people, and we need to respect each other and their boundaries. None of us know everything. I'm the Memebrarian, and I don't know everything. I learn new things every day. It's why I read so very much. This is very, very much a community. If you look hard enough, you'll find that my admins follow other pages. You'll find that other pages follow me. That this page follows other pages. And the reason we do that is because we're learning from each other. We're learning how other people do things. We're putting the work in. Yeah, I've been doing this my whole life, but I'm not as high and mighty as to say that I do not still have a whole lot to learn. My TBR list is literally a bookshelf. This requires me to respect other people's beliefs. This requires me to have a lack of judgment. This requires me to have humility and admit when what I'm doing is wrong. And this requires me to have a willingness to learn more. Obviously, I have some feelings about some of these practices, which I tend to not share unless I'm asked, but I was bloodline on both sides, but I was also born blue, so a great many of these things came to me from outside the two families that spawned me. And to be honest, my practices are likely different from yours. I'm also a scientist and an avid researcher. I picked up a lot of other tricks along the way. I don't know alchemy because I read about it in a book about trying to find the Philosopher's Stone. Although I did read a lot of books about trying to find the Philosopher's Stone, I know alchemy because I took a lot of classes in science. But ultimately, what you do in your practice is going to be up to you. What you do on your own is going to be up to you. And what consequences come of that are going to hit you. Some, if not all of these ideas are antiquated. And some of them may not still apply or may have workarounds that we can use today. There are very, very easy ways to go around most of these things. And we try to make those things readily available to you. Like, I know the candle thing is a big one. We sell them on the page. They're like, I think, what, $1? Some of them are like $2 for $1. Some of them burn down super fast. The beeswax ones, if you use them singularly, burn down super fast. You can find ways around this. So we got to ask ourselves what applies now and what we can apply to our own practice. But we also have to respect the people who want to uphold these rules. Specific orders are like private businesses in that respect, to the idea that they don't have to let you in just because you showed up, just like a god doesn't have to answer just because you called. We need to consider why we're denying people with modern sensibility, but we also need to have old respect. Do these reasons still apply? What's safe and what is not? What's antiquated and what's not? Are these feelings of gatekeeping stemming from a desire to be a part of something that's usually deemed a secret? Is it important on the other end for us to keep these secrets if we want to be more accepted into the outside world? Can we let others participate without giving up these secrets? We sure as hell can. I invite everybody to this page. Anybody who wants to follow me can feel free to do so, unless you're not showing respect. You may notice I have never posted a spell on this page. I have never shown you a page out of my grimoire on this page. That doesn't mean that everyone here isn't welcome to watch me just make a jackass of myself. Should you have a teacher? Ideally, yeah, you probably should have someone you can lean on. Dabbling is dangerous. Is that always feasible? No. That's one of the reasons why I started this page, because I wanted to give you all a place that you could come to where you could ask questions if you need to. It's why we do Q&A once a week. It's why I have opened my messenger to you guys. Am I the ideal teacher for someone online? No, I'm not always going to be there when you need me. But if you have a question, you can ask. And really, that's the end of my very long speech here. I'm going to open the floor for questions. I have a full minute of lag time on my end. So if you want to ask a question, start asking now. I recognize that not all of us are out of the broom closet and may not be ready to ask questions to the public quite yet. You can always PM me if it's something private that you want to know about. If you want to sit and think on what we've talked about today and ask it later, we'll do Q&A later on in the week. What is this? Are these questions people ask?
Yeah, they're
Oh, raised in a pagan household, but last touch in the last year, wants to get back into the study, but her mom's passed, does not know where to start. Are there books you recommend for beginners? Pagan is a very, very broad term. Pagan really just means polytheistic. So a lot of religions are pagan. So it's hard for me to kind of recommend a book on paganism because paganism is such a broad topic. If you are, the Norse are pagan. I know we see a lot of heathen pages saying they're Norse, but they have a god system. They have quite a few gods. The Hawaiians are I can't speak for modern Hawaiians, but the ancient Hawaiians were pagans, and they had a god system and a tiki system and all sorts of things. Really, any polytheistic religion is considered pagan, and to an extent, any non-Christian religion is considered pagan. You'll hear me talk about lots of different god systems because I just find religion in general interesting. I'm kind of a universalist in that respect, that I think these religions kind of stem from a common source. If you have a specific religion you're interested in, feel free to PM me, and I can kind of help you with books that you're looking to read on which religion you're interested in, whether it's the Greek pantheon or Norse mythology. We do have a Norse lady on the team here, or whatever sort of pagan religion it's in. You can also feel free to call me and ask with any questions. I would recommend against going with internet sources, blanket pages, books meant for teenagers. I just wouldn't do it. They're unclear. I have a question about pendulum work. I've heard that you should cast a circle before pendulum work, and I've also heard that it's not necessary to do so. What's my opinion? I don't cast a circle before I do pendulum work. The reason that people cast circles is because they're trying to create a boundary. They're trying to keep an area where the magic is essentially contained in, so that sort of the magic bounces off of those walls instead of escaping into the outer atmosphere. Therefore concentrating it and focusing it in a certain point, whether that's your pendulum or your candle or your crucible or your cauldron or whatever you're working with. The Norse are big advocates for laying down a white cloth before throwing runes in the same sort of way. Wiccans love a good circle, I know. Some tarot card readers are very big on laying down a certain cloth, whether it's white or patterned, which is usually the same cloth they wrap their cards in, to kind of concentrate that magic. I am a big advocate for circles, one, to concentrate power, but also to keep negative influences out. I don't generally use circles for divination. We use circles more for work affecting the outside world. And we use them in different ways, and we make them out of different things depending on what we're doing here within the coven. And also different cultures make them out of different things, from brick dust to ifan to cascarilla to salt. If you're going outdoors, please don't salt the earth. It will make nothing ever grow there again for a very, very long time. That may be a place where you have to get creative. To broomsticks, there are circles with entrances and exits. There are circles without them. It is common. Sometimes there are practices where you blow an entrance in or out of the circle to blow something in or out of the circle. This really depends on your practice and what you're doing. If you're new to pendulum work and you feel trouble focusing, or you feel like you're in a household where there is a lot of excess stimuli, whether that's fae or spirits or demons or whatever you believe in, a circle might be a good safe space for you. It may be a good place for you to practice that kind of telekinetic thing. But that's really going to be something up to you and your personal practice. I don't do it for divination. But that is not to say that I don't regularly use circles. Do we have any other questions? They don't necessarily have to be about gatekeeping. I know you guys hold these questions all week long, and I've been kind of on sabbatical since surgery and not answering a ton of them. I've been trying to keep up with the comments, but this is about, it's been a while since we've done a video. This is about 2 weeks we haven't done a video now, 3 weeks, something like that. I think we did one right before I went to surgery. I'm mumbling. We did one right before I went into surgery. I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's been a while since I've been on voice rest, and my ASL sucks, and I don't expect you guys to know ASL either. But if you have something else, can you scroll? Is this
No.
Instead on live.
Yeah.
I have runes I made out of ashwood. Oh, that's wonderful. That's delightful. See, now that might be something that you want to use a barrier for, like a white cloth. Is that live? Because all I can see is who's watching on the phone.
No, this right here is all that's gone through while you were doing.
Mason and Pagan household, we already did that. I think these are mostly opinions.
No.
Demonstrates Eric Allison Nielsen writes demonstrates conviction ? I don't really know what part of the movie that was in, but yes, most likely, I think a lot of these practices are meant to demonstrate conviction, to demonstrate that you're dedicated to these sorts of things. Monk and the rabbi, yeah. So you're trying to demonstrate conviction. You're trying to demonstrate commitment. You're trying to demonstrate that you're willing to make a sacrifice to be a part of these orders. They don't want you necessarily in the order unless they know that you're going to stick around. Let's all face it, none of us like to waste our time. Nobody wants to spend months with somebody teaching them things that they hold very dear to then have them kind of dip out because it's just not for me. And it's totally okay to dip out if things just aren't for you. If you're in a cult and you realize you're in a cult, by all means, dip the fuck out as soon as feasibly possible. But if it's just a religious sect, we have to kind of consider that the people that are teaching you, your priests, your rabbis, your santarinos, your santarias, are teaching you these things, and it takes a generous toll on themselves as well, so they want to make sure that you're as committed as they are to it. Vicarious, don't teach you, don't understand it, or minus one. Well, yeah, that's a lot of comments. I'm ex-Mormon, they do a bit of the gatekeeping. That is actually kind of funny. Alright, so this isn't live? Is this live scrolling?
Well, that's all from the entire video. That's the end of the comments. So at present, that's the end of it.
Okay. What would I do without IT people? Not make these videos, that's for sure.
It would be fine.
It would be entertaining to watch me try to do this all by myself. We started this in the middle of a storm and had a whole discussion about what we were going to do if the power went out and how I was going to be capable of doing that on my own. It's fine. Well, I know it looks like a few people have just now started watching. Do any of you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, whether it's about gatekeeping or whether it's just questions you've been holding up throughout the week. I know I've been MIA outside of the comments section. But we are reaching our hour mark. I'll give you guys a few minutes because I know not everybody wants to sit here all night, but I'm always here, I'm always around. I do work a full-time job, but I'll try to get back to you as soon as I humanly can. Let me know if you have questions. Don't be afraid to reach out. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to be a non-judgmental, non-biased voice. I have been doing this a long time, though. If you want to know my opinion, I'm more than happy to give it to you. If you want books or articles, I'm more than happy to give you sources. I may be one of the few people on the internet who's willing to cite my sources. I'm completely okay with that. That's what the librarian does. We know where the books are. Should we give them a minute? I think we've about hit it. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate y'all coming to my TED Talk. I hope that we have learned some things about diversity here and about respect for other people, and have learned in a way to kind of appreciate other people's practices, whether that's for us or not. I do appreciate that. I appreciate you guys sticking around and coming to do this. And if there are videos that you want to see in the future, if there's something that you want to learn more about, let me know. Let me know if there is something that you'd appreciate a video on, or something that you've been wondering about. Someone is asking me about my mug. Okay. My mug was actually our Thank you very much. My mug was actually our story for a while. It says revenge is beneath me, but accidents happen. It has Liz Taylor on it. It was just a fabulous human being who lost 7 husbands. I wonder why that happened. It's delightful. It was given to me by a friend who made it because he knew I loved the meme. Oh, I got a heart. Apparently someone else likes my mug too. Alright. Well, Pauline, I'm sorry. We will post this video again on the page at the end. So if you are coming in late, you can always watch it on the page later. And I think you can still comment on it once it's posted, can't you? Yes, you can. Apparently you can still comment on the video after it's posted. I don't know if I get a, do I get a notification on that? Do you get a notification for that? I'm asking my admin, sorry.
Should work like any other meme or video.
I don't know. But yeah, we're saying we probably get the notification, so if you want to watch this later, feel free. You can start from the beginning. I know it's long, so you need free time to watch it. Otherwise, we'll do Q&A probably in a few days here, if you need time to process. But thanks again, guys. I appreciate y'all coming in and watching. I appreciate everything you do. Your guys' likes and shares, especially your group shares, are what keeps this page going. It's what keeps it running. It's what has gotten close to 6,000 people in here in the last 2.5 months. It is, that in itself is super magical to all of us over here trying to help keep this page going. And you are the driving force that keeps us going and checking those comments and putting the memes up and making sure the IT works behind it as we transition over to the new page system on Facebook. So thanks everybody. I appreciate y'all. I hope you have a good night, and we will talk in the next Q&A session. Night.